Welcome, operatives. Today we will be examining the nature of time as revealed through the working of the time gates. There is a lot of information to cover, and by the end of this briefing, you should have a working knowledge of the terrain of the Eternal War, as well as the primary weapons used to fight it. This briefing is divided into 10 parts. Chapter 1, What is a Timeline? The Infinite Possibilities. Chapter 2, What is a Timeline? A Defined Present. Chapter 3, Manipulating a Timeline. Timeless and Enigmas. Chapter 4, Manipulating a Timeline. Flashpoints and Branches. Chapter 5, Traveling the Timelines. Predicting the Future. Chapter 6, Traveling the Timelines. Visiting the Past. Chapter 7, The Meta-Timeline. Order of Operations. Chapter 8, The Meta-Timeline. Rabbit Holes. Chapter 9, Final Notes. Arenas. And Chapter 10, Final Notes, The Timeless Perspective. First, we must establish the basics. You should be aware by now that the Eternal War is fought across multiple parallel timelines. To begin, however, we invite you to consider time as if none of these branches existed. Consider time as it was before the Eternal War. A single timeline, a single sequence of events. However, this is deceptively simple. While we, as timeless, are tempted to treat this as the one and only timeline, the truth is a bit more complex. There are, in fact, infinite possibilities. Every moment, an infinite amount of variables are playing out, and for each variable, there is a universe where it played out differently. However, there is a reason that timeless divide timelines into what are called real timelines and theoretical timelines, or whether a timeline is considered real or merely information. This is because the time gates only access a select few of these infinite timelines, namely, the most probable ones. Consider our singular, real timeline for the moment. While there are infinite possibilities, not all possibilities are equally likely. That series of events which is most likely is considered to be the real timeline. Some timeless are confused at this statement and protest that in the actual timelines that we see, improbable things happen quite often. This is a misunderstanding of our terms and the scale which we are using. For instance, the likelihood of two particular individuals running into each other unexpectedly may seem low, but that is merely due to a lack of information. Each person has a logical reason for being at one place at a given time. Once we see all of those reasons, we can understand that the coincidental meeting only appeared to be unlikely. Even an accident can be more likely than we understand. For example, if an auto accident occurs because of a part's failure, that part was not up to its designated task. It did not fulfill its purpose because it was manufactured with a substandard method. It was manufactured with a substandard method because the factory had relaxed its standards. The standards were relaxed because of financial difficulties. There were financial difficulties because of changing market conditions, which had their own causes, and so on. Viewed as a whole, there seems to be no chance involved. Each event in the chain follows a logic of its own. However, when we do not have all of this information and merely ask, what are the odds that this part is substandard? With no further information, we express this in terms of probability. This is not what we mean when referring to unlikely timelines. We are referring to minuscule changes, including on the quantum level, which lead to macroscopic differences in the timeline. These probabilities are not intuitively understood, but fortunately for you as operatives, you do not need to concern yourself with the fine details of what differentiates a real timeline from a theoretical one. For those curious, we refer you to the temporal mechanics of the Upsilon division. In our singular timeline example, if we viewed a cross-section of time, we would see a shape like a mountain. The peak would be that most probable series of events accessible by the time gate. The slopes on either side would be the increasingly improbable alternate possibilities. Here, we should also note that some of the infinite possibilities are virtually indistinguishable from the true timeline. The popular proverbial example is that of an individual who one morning had pancakes instead of waffles. That one change in breakfast for one morning being the only change that distinguishes the two timelines. In fact, there are infinite such timelines with similarly insignificant changes. Through an unknown process, the time gates select only one such timeline to be accessible. Despite how probable the alternate waffle timeline is, the time gate network denies access to it. This is presumably due to either some unknown probability factor or is an artificial suppression due to the substantial similarity of the various timelines. This is the basic structure of a timeline, a series of infinite possibilities sorted by probability and a singular example selected by the time gate network, resulting in only one temporal chain that Timeless can access. There is one other key aspect to understanding timelines and how Timeless interact with them. While some might believe that to a Timeless, any point in time is equal to any other, this is not true. The time gates define a specific present day on each timeline. Using our example of a singular timeline, we can illustrate the temporal location of a time gate. Please note that this is not a static location in time. Meaning, for example, the gate is not locked to 11:40 a.m. October 1st, 1982. Rather, as stated, the time gate defines a present day that is continuously advancing in real time, as it were. In other words, if a Timeless left this timeline and spent 2 days on another timeline, they would return to the first timeline to find that 2 days had passed here as well. This is one instance where the time gates do behave intuitively. Similarly, intuitions about the past and future of a given timeline are surprisingly applicable. For the most part, the past cannot be substantially altered, while the future is not as concrete. In this way, a time gate acts as a sort of recording head, transforming possibilities of the future into facts of the past. This creates a definite moment which is crucial to most battles across the Eternal War, particularly in regards to flashpoints. It is worth noting that the present of all timelines and time gates are synced together. These are also synced with the present of the meta-timeline, but that will be discussed more in the chapters dedicated to the meta-timeline. These concepts will be crucial to understand for later chapters. Now that we understand the makeup of a timeline, we can discuss how to alter it. There are many alterations that can be made, but generally they fall into two categories: those that cause branching timelines and those that do not, or in other words, macro and micro changes. Let us first focus on micro or non-branching changes. Two of the three ways these changes can arise are due to the creation of a timeless or the intervention of an enigma. The creation of a timeless occurs when an individual enters a time gate for the first time. Their past is removed from the timeline. Similarly, when an enigma encounters a non-timeless on a timeline, they also remove them from the timeline. However, while entering a time gate recreates the individual on the meta-timeline, an enigma erases them completely. Despite these radically different outcomes for the individual, the effects on the timeline are virtually identical. In both cases, the individual is removed with the minimum amount of changes to the resulting timeline. Recall that there are infinite timelines nearly identical to the real one, but merely suppressed by the time gate network. When an individual is removed from a timeline, the time gates search for an appropriate new timeline from those infinite possibilities. Because there are infinite options, there is guaranteed to be one that is identical, save for the presence of the removed individual. Technically, the time gates do not select the timeline with only that change. If that were the case, they could select a timeline where everyone the removed individual met simply hallucinated everything that he or she had done. Instead, the time gates make a compromise selection in which they balance minimal changes with maximal probability. Thus, when an individual is removed, no timeline with an absurd quantity of hallucinations is produced to replace it. Many struggle to understand or to accept how a person can be removed from time without causing major changes to the timeline. There are several ways in which this happens. The most common is by simply eliminating minor interactions and replacing major interactions with interactions involving other individuals. To help you understand, let's create a hypothetical example. There is a man named John. John is about to become a timeless. In John's life on his native timeline, he, among other things, stopped his friend Tom from making a bad investment, frequently talked to Nancy at the bus stop when she had no one else in her life, gives some of his old furniture to Frank, and introduced future spouses Sarah and Joe. John then steps through a time gate and becomes a timeless. He is removed from the past and present of his timeline. The time gates select a new timeline with the following changes. Tom is now prevented from making a bad investment by his other friend, Bill. Another person at the bus stop, Bob, is now the one to talk to Nancy. Frank simply finds some cheap furniture to buy and makes fewer purchases on non-essentials. Sarah and Joe meet through a chance encounter now rather than an introduction. Some additional minor changes may be required to smooth out these changes, but this is entirely possible. Remember, there are infinite alternate possible timelines that the TimeGate network can choose from, so there are always possibilities. If John instead encountered Enigma before becoming a timeless, the same changes would be employed. The only difference is that John would not become a timeless. He would simply cease to exist. In contrast, if John stepped through a time gate, while his old life would cease to exist, he would be recreated as a timeless on the meta-timeline. Again, the meta-timeline will be discussed further in a later chapter. At this point, it's worth explicitly stating that a timeless is an individual who has gone through a time gate and reconstituted on the meta-timeline. They are the only ones capable of doing so, and they no longer exist on their native timelines. They also have a few other unique properties which will be discussed in later chapters. They are otherwise human, but with a unique relationship to the timelines. There is one other important note regarding Enigmas and Timeless. Enigmas cannot clip Timeless the way they do with normal denizens of the timelines. However, Timeless should not underestimate the dangers of an Enigma. In some respects, they are equally dangerous to a Timeless, perhaps even more so. They are capable of trapping and mentally assaulting a Timeless, driving them to insanity. Timeless trapped by Enigmas rarely recover from such a fate. Timeless who encounter an Enigma who clips an inhabitant of a timeline will be transported with the Enigma onto the new, real timeline. Timeless who have witnessed such clipping events often report feeling a physical sensation as they are transported to the new timeline. This effect appears to be localized to a relatively small area around the clipping event. At this point, many ask what an enigma is and what their origins are. Unfortunately, Timepiece has limited information on enigmas due to their extreme threat. Enigmas are capable of entering or exiting timelines, remaining undetectable and invulnerable until they strike. They are mechanical beings with 5 manipulator tentacles and round main bodies, to our best observation. Their main body is hidden by a black drape, often ragged in appearance. Their origins are completely unknown. However, they often appear near arcane tech, such as inactive time gates. Based on this, it is theorized that enigmas are some sort of defense system intended to prevent unauthorized individuals from accessing future tech. However, the erratic behavior of enigmas has cast doubt on this hypothesis. In addition to the micro changes made through the creation of Timeless and clipping by the Enigmas, there are macro changes. These are, of course, the creation of branching timelines at flashpoints. Flashpoints form the basis of many of our conflicts with Anarachia. Flashpoints are critical moments in a timeline where significant and immediate change is linked to a single event. Note those three key aspects which make up a flashpoint. Flashpoints are potential timeline alterations which have the following characteristics. 1. Likely change. A potential alteration to a timeline already has to be particularly likely. For instance, a critical decision by a world leader where that world leader may be swayed to either one of two plausible options. There must be two potential timelines of nearly equal probability. 2. Significant change. The potential alteration would result in widespread changes across the parallel Earth. These changes should affect a large percentage of the global population. This requirement for widespread change may be the reason why so many flashpoints are concentrated in the 20th and 21st centuries. It was the earliest time of rapid global communication. 3. Immediate change. The alteration's effect must not only be widespread, but take effect at scale shortly after its inception. Subtle alterations, which will vastly alter the world within the next 100 years, will not constitute a flashpoint. Instead of splitting a timeline as with a flashpoint, such slow-acting changes will merely alter the timeline. A moment on a timeline where all three of these criteria are met is considered to be a flashpoint. As alluded to, actions by a timeless during a flashpoint could result in the creation of another timeline. Since there are two potential and very likely timelines, a timeless need only alter events to occur in the slightly less likely direction in order to create an alternate timeline. For example, let us assume that in the predicted natural timeline, a world leader is tempted to suddenly declare war. This war would quickly involve much of the world, whether they would participate in it or merely react to it by shuffling their defenses and so on. Despite immense personal temptation, the leader eventually decides against it. This moment of decision is a flashpoint. Knowing that a flashpoint is approaching, an Anarachian timeless attempts to position themselves to convince the leader to follow through and declare war. Naturally, timepiece agents would be dispatched to stop him, but for our example, let us assume the Anarachian succeeds. The leader declares war and the world changes. As a result, the Timegate network is conflicted. The actual, more probable path is that the timeline continues without a declaration of war. However, an agent acting from outside of this timeline has intervened and unquestionably altered events. The events cannot be reconciled. Their consequences are too great and immediate. The actions of the timeless can also not be ignored. As a result, the network is forced to accept these changes to the timeline while also attempting to maintain the original version. The result is that the changes are shunted into a new secondary timeline. The network preserves the original timeline where there was peace. However, it also creates a second timeline where there is war. Both timelines become real. In the process of creating the second timeline, a few other notable events take place. First, a new present is established on the timeline. This is more notable when flashpoints are exploited through trips to the past, which will be discussed later. For now, simply note that the moment on a timeline when a flashpoint is exploited to create a second timeline will become the present position of the time gates on that second timeline. Second, the physical locations of the various time gates will shift with the creation of a new timeline. They will only shift on the new timeline, and the reason is unknown. There also seems to be little pattern as to where the time gates will relocate themselves on the globe. It is worth noting that there is a theoretical upper limit to the number of timelines that the time gate network can sustain. Each division makes the network slightly less stable, as probabilities are divided among more and more timelines. Fortunately, while no concrete number on the maximum possible timelines has been agreed on, it is agreed that the network is not yet near this point. This is a credit to the work of our agents, who have successfully prevented several Flashpoint exploitations by Anarachia. While a strategic rather than technical concern, it is worth reminding agents that the overall goal of Timepiece is to prevent timeline splits. The decision to create a new timeline to one's specifications is a decision too great for anyone to make. Additionally, Anarachia's creation of multiple timelines is for the express purpose of exploiting those worlds and giving power to the ruling Anarax. Now that we have established an understanding of how timelines can be changed, we are equipped to discuss traveling to different points along them. As noted previously, time gates define a specific present on a timeline. Due to this, traveling forward in time or backward in time are two very different processes. By far, the simpler of the two is traveling into the future. While a present is being defined, the time gate network is capable of predicting the most likely future. Indeed, without the interference of a timeless, the future would be as set as the present. This is because, as previously explained, timelines are by their nature the most likely outcome. However, as explained in the last chapter, timeless are capable of altering the events on a timeline, even subtly. Because of this, points on a timeline that occur further ahead than the temporal location of a time gate are not certain. Even minor alterations by a timeless in the present could invalidate the future projected previously. In this way, future projections can be dangerous to timeless who perform them. If a timeless is projected into a hypothetical future, and that future becomes unlikely due to changes in the present, that timeline could be lost. Similarly, the timeless who are visiting those futures will also be lost. Unlike when a timeline is altered by an enigma, timeless projected into the future do not snap to the new, real timeline. This is because no future projection is real in the same sense. You may have noticed our continuous use of the word projection in this chapter. This is because time gates do not truly send anyone into the future of a timeline. Time gates continuously revise their predictions of the future based on the actions of timeless in the present. Additionally, there is the matter of the infinite selection process. Remember that there are an infinite number of nearly identical timelines, and that the time gates must select one to be the real timeline. This is a constant process, as every moment has infinite branching timelines. Therefore, the moment at which the time gates decide which events will become part of the real timeline is the moment they define as the present. When a timeless sets the destination of a time gate to a point in the future, the time gate network selects one of the most plausible future timelines for the purpose of that journey. That timeline is rendered for the duration of that timeless's trip. However, should conditions in the present change due to accumulated changes in the network selection of the real timeline, or to the influence of the timeless in the present, the future projection becomes invalid. The projection is cancelled as the probabilities shift away from the real threshold. Timeless caught in such a shift may be lost forever. There is a small window in which they can return to a time gate and return to the present. The exact window, however, varies based on the shift in the present. Because of this, Timepiece has placed defined limits on the duration and distance of future projections. To create a future projection, a time gate must have its current connection disconnected. Normally, time gates connect to other time gates in other timelines, or to gates on iterant point in the meta timeline. A future projection instead connects the time gate to a projected version of itself further down the timeline. It must maintain this connection for the duration of the projection. Because of this, a future projection comes at a cost. it denies the opportunity to use that time gate for other connections. Future projections are invaluable sources of information on the likely developments of a timeline. However, they carry great risk and their predictions should not be considered set in stone. While future projections may be dangerous, traveling to the past is complicated. Unlike with the future, the past is, as expected, far more concrete. Events have already transpired which led to the present, as defined by the time gates. However, there are ways to alter the past to a limited degree. First, it should be noted that there are some limitations on which points in time can be accessed. There must be an available connection to the past. That means an available time gate, one that did not have an established connection at the desired time. This is not always a possibility. Many time gates are connected to iterance points or other timelines for long periods of time. This is because establishing or changing a time gate connection is a lengthy and laborious process. Establishing a connection between two time gates requires a 24-hour period of calibration. This can be quite costly when considering a timeline in contention. At points in time where a flashpoint or other critical event is nearing, time gates are in high demand to move personnel. Unfortunately, these are also the periods in which their use as endpoints for arriving in the past are also most needed. It should also be noted that establishing a connection with a past time gate still requires the 24-hour calibration period on both ends of the connection. Thus, there must be a large window in which a time gate was inactive and not establishing another connection. Due to these factors, interventions in past flashpoints often involve long stays in the past. For instance, visitors to the past will often arrive days or weeks before the event they are assigned to. They will lay low for that period of time until the moment to act arrives. This has its own drawback as well. For every moment they spend in the past, a moment passes in the absolute present on iterant point, or in the meta-timeline if you prefer. The presence of each timeline still advances well. Therefore, travelers to the past are unavailable for standard missions. This is a problem for Timepiece when we are short on personnel. Once a team has been inserted into the past of a timeline, there are limited actions they may perform. They may not make alterations to the past that would substantially alter the present. The changes which can be made are similar to the changes involved in the creation of a timeless or clipping by an enigma. Minor alterations which force the time gate to choose a different, real, timeline, but that remains mostly consistent with the present. The most important aspect of any changes to the past are that they cannot conflict with any knowledge of any timeless. Effectively, timeless cannot alter their or any other timeless's past. For instance, if a timeless witnessed a man being shot, no amount of time travel could stop him from being shot. The events would play out identically to how the timeless witnessed it. However, if the shooter was not visible to the timeless, their identity could be altered through trips to the past. For instance, if another timeless went back to this moment and tackled the original shooter, then an accomplice would take the shot. The shot would land precisely as it did when the first timeless witnessed it. This is because the time gates alter probability to ensure the consistency of the original timeless's knowledge. There is some margin of error, however. The fallibility of human memory allows for some differences in the two events. If the first timeless originally witnessed the man shot in the lower left side, it may be possible that the altered version has him shot in the upper left side. This is because such details are often misremembered by the human brain, and thus no concrete contradiction has been created. However, this is only to a limited degree and mostly involves high-stress situations. If a timeless coroner had performed an autopsy on the man shortly after he was shot, he would concretely identify the location of the entry wound. This could not then be altered by any insertion into the past. No matter how improbable, the accomplice would shoot the victim in the same spot as he had been hit before the intervention on the timeline. While this seems grossly limiting to many new operatives, there are still many valuable applications of visits to the past. One simple but invaluable usage is the collection of additional intelligence. In the previous example, if the shooter's identity was unknown, it could be discovered through a trip to the past. However, there are some changes which can be made. These changes must be more subtle than what many would wish, but they can be invaluable to the greater war. For example, let's assume that Timepiece becomes concerned that Anarachia may target a particular facility. If Anarachia's Timeless have not already witnessed the facility's security, then Timepiece may act. Instead of revealing our presence directly, Timepiece could send agents into the past. These agents could then find a way to increase the facility's security. These changes would be applied to the present, creating a much more secure facility in an efficient manner. For instance, if our Timeless were sent years into the past but only remained there for weeks, years of security improvements could be made without tying up our resources for years of real time on the absolute present. Note here that the limitations on altering the past could play to our advantage in this scenario. If Anarachian Timeless did not see the security arrangements in person, but only saw schematics, our alterations may still be possible. The time gates might select a version of events where the plans the Anarachians obtained become outdated versions on the modified timeline. They still witnessed the same information, but the context has shifted. This would be particularly advantageous for us, as they would now be working with misinformation. At this point, please note that one effective defense against negative past alterations is to make sure Timeless witness as many important events as possible. This is not a foolproof defense as we've discussed, but it greatly limits the enemy's options in altering the past. We should also emphasize that the Timegate network will go to great lengths to avoid incompatible pasts and presents. They will select any number of seemingly implausible events to prevent a true contradiction. Improbable is always preferable to impossible. A true paradox, if possible, would likely destroy the entire network. One final note on this primer on past-based operations. Many may ask if traveling to the past can create branching timelines, even if they had previously been prevented in the present. The technical answer is yes. There is nothing theoretically stopping someone from visiting a past flashpoint and operating in such a way as to create a new timeline. However, in practice, this is extremely difficult. Because flashpoints are so critical and can be predicted through future projections, both Timepiece and Anarachia deploy additional Timeless to intervene in such situations. This results in many Timeless eyes being present for critical moments. In turn, this leaves few opportunities in which Timeless can later return to this moment. Returning to this moment when it is the past means those Timeless can only operate in the limited space where Timeless hadn't been previously observing. It is still possible, but extremely difficult, therefore, to create a branching timeline retroactively. However, Anarachia has succeeded on numerous occasions despite our best efforts. This results in new various different years of the present on various timelines. For instance, if the main timeline's present was on the year 2000, but Anarachia traveled to a flashpoint in 1930, on success, the new timeline's present would remain in 1930. This is the reason for the various different presents across the timelines. At this point, a discussion of the meta-timeline may help clarify some concepts. At this stage, many may be wondering about multiple time travel events. Using our previous example, if a timepiece team went back in time to fortify a facility, couldn't an Anarakian team go further back in time and prevent that fortification? The answer depends on the order of operations on the meta-timeline. As previously mentioned, all presents on the various timelines are synced to the true present or absolute present on iterant point. Iterant point is a physical location on the meta-timeline. It is not an entire Earth, but rather an artificial construct. Its true origins are as shrouded in mystery as those of the time gates. However, it is clearly a control facility for the time gate network. Some have mistakenly described iterant point as existing outside of time. This is not true. Iterant point has a definitive flow of time, like all standard timelines. However, iterant point and the meta-timeline exist independently from all other timelines. In short, time does pass on iterant point. It passes at the exact same rate as it does on all other timelines. From the control centers on iterant point, Timepiece can monitor activity across all of the other timelines. Iterant point contains the largest concentration of time gates across any timeline, as most of those are connected to gates on the various timelines. Anarakia has a similar facility in the meta-timeline, which also serves as their control center. Please note that because time passes on iterant point, there is an order in which agents are dispatched into the past. Let's use our previous example. On day 1 on iterant point, Timepiece sends agents back in time on a timeline. These agents fortify the defenses of a given facility. On day 2 on iterant point, and on the present of the other timeline, Anarakia notices the enhanced security. They send their own agents back in time on the timeline. However, because Timepiece agents acted on day 1 of the meta-timeline, their changes have already been implemented. They have priority in the time gate network. Therefore, if the Anarakian agents tried to make alterations on the timeline, these changes cannot contradict with what the Timepiece agents saw on their trip to the past. Remember, this does not mean that the Anarakians' changes cannot happen. It does mean that they are unlikely to be implemented by the network, however. In this case, the Timepiece agents have already had extensive observation of the facility's security measures. It would be extremely difficult to recontextualize all of the information the entire team had seen. In such a scenario, the Timegate network would more likely implement changes to the timeline which prevent the Anarakians from interfering in the first place. For example, the Anarakians might be improbably spotted and prevented from intervening. Remember, the Timegate networks balance probability and consistency when deciding which changes to make. This order of operations also applies to creating timeless or to a clipping event by an Enigma. For example, let's say that on day 1, John was recruited to be a Timepiece agent. He would then be removed from his native timeline. On day 2, Anarakia sends agents back in his native timeline to assassinate him. They will be unsuccessful, however, because he will have never been on that timeline. This is because the timeline was altered by the network on day 1 of the meta-timeline. Similarly, if on day 1 of the meta-timeline an Enigma clips John, he cannot be recruited on day 2. Even if on day 2 of the meta-timeline, Timeless went to the past of the timeline to recruit John, they would find that he never existed. Again, the changes to the timeline happened on day 1 of the meta-timeline. The operation, remove John from the timeline, happened prior to the operation, send the Timeless to this timeline's past. This is the origin of the meta-timeline's name. It is a timeline of the events which alter the timelines. a timeline of timelines. Having learned this, many agents ask the question, can we travel back in time on the meta-timeline? The answer for most of us is no. However, there are specialized time lists called white rabbits whose job it is to do precisely that. However, we should first note that traveling back in meta-time is a substantially different experience than traveling to the past of a timeline. It requires the creation of a rabbit hole. A rabbit hole is a special type of time gate connection which is used to rewind meta-time. It comes with two definitive drawbacks, however. First, a rabbit hole can only be used by a full gate. Let us take a moment to note the differences between a minor time gate and a full time gate. A full time gate is one that is embedded within a wall or surface, often one belonging to a time gate facility. Few such facilities exist outside of Iterant's Point, where the vast majority of full time gates are located. Full time gates are also the only time gates capable of creating future projections or traveling to a timeline's past. Minor time gates are far more common, though have much less functionality. Minor time gates consist only of the two intersecting rings and are often freestanding. Frequently, one ring is stationary and embedded into the ground, while the second ring rotates freely. This is in contrast to a full time gate. On those, both rings are embedded in a wall and spin freely. Minor time gates may connect to any other time gate, but may only do so between their present positions. The second drawback of creating a rabbit hole is their blackout effect. The endpoint of a rabbit hole is subject to a blackout, a cessation of time gate functionality. The time gate in the meta past, which is chosen as the exit point, ceases to function for a week in either temporal direction. In other words, for a week before and a week after the white rabbit arrives in the meta past. Additionally, many time gates across the network cease operation for a 24 to 48 hour period. This greatly reduces the number of safe choices for rabbit hole endpoints. As a reminder, the mission of most white rabbits is to bring useful information back in meta-time to timepiece, with the goal of preventing a total defeat. However, creating these blackout events could radically alter the future of the destination meta-timeline, rendering the given information useless. The nature of the meta-timeline is also very distinct from most timelines, which affects traveling on it. It is often more useful to think of traveling back in meta-time as rewinding the meta-timeline, rather than traveling along it. Once a white rabbit enters a rabbit hole, they may not return to their previous meta-timeline. Instead, the absolute present of Iterant's Point is reset to the time of their arrival. This has sparked much debate in the Upsilon division. Since the previous meta-timeline appears to have been erased, where does the white rabbit come from? Why do they continue to exist? Why does this not cause a paradox? There are no clear answers at this time, but the leading hypothesis is that the previous meta-timeline is not erased, but merely converted into information. This would be a similar effect to the altering probabilities involved in creating a timeless. In that sense, a white rabbit may be something akin to a meta-timeless. However, many Upsilons are not convinced of this explanation. For your purposes, it is enough to say that the former meta-timeline no longer exists, save as a memory within the white rabbit. White rabbits also cannot be drawn from any timeless. They must pass a rigorous psychological examination and be compatible with a chemical treatment which allows them to survive the harsh conditions of a rabbit hole. White rabbits must remain on various medications for the rest of their lives due to this chemical treatment, which also bleaches their hair white. This, along with the nickname rabbit hole, is the origin of the term white rabbit. Because the absolute present has been reset, any number of changes may be made to the meta-timeline by a white rabbit. The limitations of an insertion into the past on a normal timeline do not apply. Instead, there are only considerations to be made about logistics. When and where can a blackout be afforded? How much information should be acted on immediately? Or how many of our actions from the previous meta-timeline should we repeat? While the usage of rabbit holes can prevent absolute defeat, they do come with a host of complications. In addition to the previously discussed mechanics, there is one final form of time manipulation to discuss. That is the usage of the construct known as the arena. This mechanism, however, operates on different principles than most of the aforementioned temporal manipulations, and so discussion of it has been reserved until now. However, the usage of the arena may be the most applicable to you as agents of timepiece. Unlike with insertions to the past or other temporal manipulations, the creation and usage of the arena does not require direct oversight or assistance from iterant's point. An arena can be created merely by using any standard issue time gauge. Each time gauge will feature a button or crown on the middle right side. When first pressed, an arena will be deployed. If it is pressed again while an arena is active, the arena will reset. If the central crown is pulled, and all other time gauges in the arena do the same, the arena is collapsed. An arena is a small area which is briefly separated from a timeline. The size of an arena is determined by the time gauges through a process that we do not yet understand. By default, arenas are spherical areas. However, if inside a hallway, a room, or a series of rooms, arenas may shape themselves in whole or in part based on the walls around them. If at any point the boundaries of an arena are crossed, the arena collapses and all within are returned to the timeline as normal. The unique property of the arena is the ability to reset time within it. At any point, if a middle crown or button on a time gauge is pressed, everyone and everything inside returns to the state they were in when the arena first dropped. This includes resetting any injuries, including death. Each of these iterations is considered hypothetical until the arena is collapsed. They are entirely separate from the events of the timeline and are even separate from the absolute present. These iterations are often described as drafts of the events. This is because once the arena is broken or collapsed, the events within as they are played out in the last iteration become the actual events of the timeline. For example, imagine there is a timeless and an observer at a basketball court. The timeless activates an arena, and when it drops, the observer is left on the outside of the arena. Inside, the timeless takes a shot, and if he misses, he resets the arena and tries again. He does this 3 times before getting the ball in the hoop. When he does, he collapses the arena. However, the observer only saw him take 1 shot, which landed in the hoop. This is because the first 3 iterations, the ones where he missed, were hypothetical. They were not synced with the timeline. The 4th was. Therefore, it is the final version, not a draft. They become the true events which happened from the perspective of the timeline. This remains true whether the arena was collapsed with a time gauge or broken when something passes through the boundary. An arena may also be broken from the outside. In the example from before, if the observer was running towards the timeless, he could also break the arena. Let us assume that the observer will cross the boundary of the arena after 3 seconds. Inside the arena, the timeless may make as many shots and resets as he wants, so long as none of them are 3 seconds long. Let's say his first 2 attempts take only 2 seconds, but his third takes 4. After 3 seconds on his third iteration, the observer breaks through the arena, which collapses, and the Timeless has missed his shot. Note, too, that arenas can only be established in relatively stable conditions. Areas which are subject to large-scale outside interference cannot establish an arena. For example, if Timeless are in a train yard with trains going through constantly, the constant violations of any potential arena's boundaries makes establishing an arena impossible. The exact nature of what constitutes significant interference is unclear. However, the general rule of thumb is that physical objects will always break arenas. Air movement, generally, will not, unless it is particularly fierce, one that noticeably moves objects in the area, for instance. Again, due to a lack of understanding in how time gauges create arenas, a precise threshold of interference cannot be reliably determined. Arenas may be reset by anyone within them. Thus, if two enemy Timeless engage in a duel within an arena, either combatant may cause a reset, even if only one activated the arena. However, all surviving Timeless must act in unison to deactivate the arena. Most time gauges come equipped with the safety feature where an arena will automatically deploy when in close proximity to Anarakian time gauges. This gives most operatives an increased chance of survival. However, this feature can be deactivated when necessary, for instance, when surreptitiously following an enemy agent. Please note that every moment an arena is active, power is being used from your time gauge. A time gauge without power cannot activate, reset, or maintain an arena. If faced with an opponent who still has a charge in their time gauge, they will be able to reset an arena at will. Therefore, agents should use the arena sparingly. Additionally, multiple resets, particularly for prolonged periods of time, can have detrimental effects on the mental health of operatives. The arena can also be manipulated for two additional advantages. First, by connecting a time gauge to an arcane tech electro-pulse gun, a stun weapon is created. The time gauge creates a modified arena between the gun and the target. The gun fires an electro-pulse designed to incapacitate, but not kill, the target. The first shot uses an estimated power level. The weapon reads the results, resets the arena, and modifies its shot accordingly. The power is lowered if the shot is lethal, or raises it if it was not debilitating. The weapon creates as many resets as necessary to find the right power level to incapacitate the target in question. Then it accepts the final iteration. Second, using similar principles, a more powerful weapon can be created with a crystal ray. Delta-grade time gauges come equipped with a crystal power emitter. When this is arranged into a weapon configuration, a palm-held weapon is created. The crystal ray is capable of emitting incredible levels of destructive power. However, the constraints on its construction result in it being highly unreliable. Most attempts to fire it will result in failure, little more than a spark. When combined with the effects of an arena, however, this is not an issue. The time gauge will simply reset as many times as necessary until the crystal ray fires at the desired power level. While both the crystal ray and the stun setting on an ATEP weapon are useful, they have one major limitation. Neither may be safely used within a pre-existing arena. Arenas cannot be created within other arenas. Therefore, the attempt to use the stun setting on an ATEP weapon or to fire the crystal ray will result in the entire arena being reset hundreds or thousands of times until the correct setting is found. As previously noted, this is detrimental to the mental health of all involved. For this reason, ATEP weapons have a safety mechanism which automatically disables their stun feature when a standard arena drops. Attentive trainees will have noticed by now the importance placed on the consciousness of Timeless. It is critical when considering alterations to a timeline's past. It is also unique in its experience of the arena. Note that while the physical body of a Timeless will reset, their mind does not. If their mind had reset with everything else, they would simply repeat their actions from a previous iteration, as they would not recall the previous iteration and have no reason to change their behavior. In fact, non-timeless caught in an arena will do just that. They will be unaware of any resets in time and continuously repeat their actions unless the stimuli around them changes. This then begs the question, what is unique about the consciousness of the Timeless? It is certainly regarded with high priority by the Timegate network. It also may be independently stored within the network, backed up from our physical bodies. Unfortunately, we have no way of verifying this. It is also worth noting that one of the determining factors for a flashpoint is the effect it will have on the people of the world. The more people who are affected by a potential change, the more likely a given moment is to be a flashpoint. This may be simply a measure of how more matter behaves differently on a branched timeline, but it also may suggest a priority the time gates place on the human mind. If this is the case, they are the minds of non-timeless. It is possible that this is the result of some long-forgotten control mechanism, that it was to ensure that humans always controlled the time gates instead of the other way around. Unfortunately, we have not been able to verify or disprove this possibility. No doubt in the field you will face similar uncertainties. It is part of the regular course of affairs as an agent of timepiece that you will work with an incomplete picture. We all are forced to do so, but as an agent, you will make the best of it. Remember, operatives, you are a valuable resource in the fight against Anarachia. Protect yourselves, support your team, and stay vigilant.